I rise like my leader from Kentucky to celebrate the life of Paul Douglas Coverdell, and I thank the leader for his kind comments there about a very personal friend to both Senator Isakson and to me, as well as to the leader. Paul Coverdell served in this body from 1993 to his untimely death on the 18th of July in 2000. Paul was a longtime politician in our state, having first run for office in 1968. He lost that first election, then was elected to the state Senate in 1970. He rose to the rank of minority leader in the Georgia State Senate and had a very successful career there, then decided to run for Congress and lost his first race for the House of Representatives. Paul did something that is so Coverdell-like. In the summer of 1978, he was then the chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, and he was on vacation in Maine. He knew, obviously, of the Vice President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, excuse me, not then Vice President, but soon to be Vice President, George H.W. Bush, but he didn't know him. But he wanted to get to know him. So he walked up to his house in Kennebunkport, didn't have to worry about Secret Service back then, knocked on his front door. President Bush came to the front door, he introduced himself. They became fast friends after that. When President Bush was elected, Paul Coverdell was very involved in his campaign. He wrote him a simple note, and he said, "If I can help you, I'd like to." Well, the president took that to heart, and he appointed Paul to be the director of the Peace Corps. Anything Paul undertook, he put his whole heart and soul into it. And when he became director of the Peace Corps, he did exactly that. He also was a very good thinker, and he created what was called worldwide schools within the Peace Corps. And those schools all of a sudden cropped up all around the world under the sponsorship of Peace Corps volunteers, and all under Paul's leadership. Paul led the first first Peace Corps volunteers into Eastern Europe after the fall of the wall. And I will never forget going to the Peace Corps building as a member of the House of Representatives after Paul's death, when the Peace Corps building was named after Paul, and to hear the many tributes of volunteers who had served for so long under Paul and the personal stories that they had about the involvement of their leader and their affection for their leader was truly humbling and very moving. When Paul was elected to the Senate in 1992, he actually had to be elected 4 times that year. He was in a primary, which he won after a runoff. He then came in second in the general election in November, but because of the rules being what they are in Georgia, as I experienced myself in 2008, Paul was in a runoff with the incumbent because an independent third-party candidate got enough votes so that the incumbent did not get 50% plus 1. Paul then won, after coming in second, the runoff election, and thus his 4th election in 1992. In 1998, he became the first Georgia Republican to ever be reelected to the United States Senate. He was such a class guy here that he was respected and admired by folks on both sides of the aisle. And I went back and looked at some of the comments that Republicans and Democrats made on the floor of the Senate after Paul's death, and it truly was, again, a very moving experience to read those comments. He created what's called the Coverdell ESA, or the Coverdell Education Savings Accounts, for they're really education IRAs to allow families to set aside money on a tax-free basis to educate their children. Paul loved education. It was very near and dear to him, and he was very, very proud of being able to establish those IRAs for future leaders of our country. Quick story about Paul. He was a very unique individual. He never wore anything but a dark suit. never wore anything but a long-sleeve white shirt. And I remember one day I had an event down in the very southern part of my congressional district down at the Okefenokee Swamp. And it was in July or August, I don't remember which, but I do remember it was extremely hot. And the humidity in South Georgia on a June or July or August date is extremely high. And we were all there, and some other members of Congress who were there were in shorts and golf shirts and whatever we could put on to stay cool or somewhat cool. That's what we had on. Paul showed up, and as always, Paul has on a dark suit and a white shirt. We finally did get him to take his tie and his coat off because we were going to ride out into the swamp. And I used to kid Paul about that really until the time of his death. The leader is right. Senator Lott had a term for Paul Coverdell. He called him Mikey because anytime Trent needed to get something done, he'd go to Mikey. And Paul just had a way of making sure that whatever the challenge was, it got done, and got done in a very efficient way. The photograph that I cherish most of all my political photographs is a black and white photo. And it's a photo of Paul and myself sitting in his office at one of our weekly meetings that took place while I was in the House and he was in the Senate. And the two of us just sitting there talking, and the expression on Paul's face is so classic Coverdell. It always makes me feel good, and it's a great reminder of Paul. Paul's wife, Nancy, has always been a dear friend. She was such a great asset to him. She has chaired my military academy appointment committee in all of my years in the Senate. She is just a wonderful, wonderful lady, and again, we have some very fond conversations together about Paul from time to time. Paul Coverdell was not just a great Georgian, he was a great American. He certainly loved our state and our country as much as anybody who has ever served in this body. And it's a sad day, but yet a very good day from the standpoint of having the opportunity to remember the strong and positive leadership of Senator Paul Coverdell.
Senator from Georgia.
I am